heard stories about them for as long as she can remember. In fact, because she had heard the stories so much when she was younger, there was a part of her that wondered if maybe the stories were just that. Fictionalized tales that were made up to entertain her around her meals. Yet as she got older, it became apparent that the stories that she had been hearing weren't made up. They were stories that had spread from village to village over the years that had talked about a God whose character seemed different from the gods her people worshipped. Stories about the Red Sea being parted and an entire people group walking over on dry land. There were stories of battles being fought and won by people who had no business winning battles. But what Rahab didn't realize about her hearing these stories year after year was that as she heard these stories, they planted a seed in her. It was a seed of hope that later gave her the faith to risk her life for the very God who was walking through life with his people. If you've been here over the past few weeks, you know that we are in a series where we're talking about the lineage of Jesus. There are names of women who show up in the story of Jesus. And we've heard about Leah, who was longing to be loved, and Tamar, whose messy story doesn't strike you as one that you would expect to show up in the ancestry of someone like Jesus. And today we're going to look at another story of an unexpected person that we find in the lineage of Jesus. Rahab was the one who had been hearing the stories about the Israelites. News of their crossing the Red Sea and defeating others in battles had reached her hometown of Jericho. If you've grown up in church or watched an episode or two of VeggieTales, the name of that town might sound familiar. Jericho was the town where the walls came tumbling down. Jericho was a part of the land that God had promised to his people, and he told his people that they would be able to conquer it one day. But before the conquest and before the walls of Jericho came tumbling down, God used Rahab to help move that mission forward. Rahab was on the outskirts of her community, both literally and figuratively. Jericho was a walled city, well prepared for being attacked by enemies because of a massive wall that surrounded the city. And Rahab was on the outskirts of that community physically because she actually lived right on the edge of that wall, away from the city center and near a gate of where people would enter in and out of town. But Rahab was also on the edge of her community, metaphorically or figuratively, because Rahab was a prostitute, which meant that she would sell herself sexually to others in order to make a living. Similarly to today, it wasn't a profession that parents hoped their kids would end up in one day. But the placement of Rahab's house made it easy for her to play such a crucial role in the story that we're about to read. So let's pick up in chapter 2 of the book of Joshua. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." Now, this is such a funny start to a story for me, because what we find out is that the spies that Joshua sent in to spy out the land weren't actually that good of spies. I'm not sure if they forgot to turn off their location services when they got into town, or the word just got out. But they rolled into town and the news spread so far that the king heard that they had showed up. Now, you need to remember what I had said earlier about the stories that Rahab had heard for as long as she could remember about the people of Israel. Because the king and all the people of Jericho would have also been hearing those stories. So the king would have been a little concerned when the people who seemed to be wiping out everything in their path came knocking on his door. So the king tells Rahab that he knows that she has men in her house, but instead of giving them up, Rahab crafts a story of her own. She had hidden the spies at her house, and when she's questioned about where they are, she says this: "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had actually taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Now, I want you to think for a moment that you were the spies who had been hidden by Rahab. Already, this whole encounter would strike them as perplexing. They were enemies of this people group, yet they showed up and Rahab welcomes them in and then lies on their behalf to protect them. I'd imagine that this wouldn't have made any logical sense, but I'd also imagine that these spies were used to strange things happening when God was on the move. We can't overlook the fact that Rahab was putting her neck and essentially her life out for these people who she barely knew. So Rahab crafts a story that she tells the king, and then she goes up on the roof where the spies were hiding, and she says to them this thing: "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard now about how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." Any questions that the spies had about her intentions of why she was doing this were answered in this interaction. Remember those stories that she had heard for as long as she could remember? She shares with the spies here that those stories were stories that had brought up fear for her entire city. The thought of the hearts melting in fear and courage failing is a pretty extreme statement. These stories that Rahab had heard about the people of Israel caused her to have a different response than her fellow community members. She tells the spies that she knows that the Lord had given the people of Israel the land, and that the God Israel worships is actually the one true God. And how did she know this? In her mind, how did she know this? She certainly didn't learn it from anyone around her. This was an idea that would have caused her to get canceled in the culture that we're in today. How did she know? Well, the Bible doesn't say, but I have a feeling that stories she had heard year after year caused her to have faith in the one true God who was making all those things happen. Rahab proclaimed that the God of the Israelites was the one true God as an act of faith. This proclamation would have been the ultimate rejection of her community and her people group and her alliances. Yet Rahab had faith in the God she had heard so many things about that she wanted to have a part in the story that God was writing. Rahab had come to the knowledge of who God was, and as a result, she risked her life in obedience to him. She risked her life by hiding the spies, sending a false tip, and making a plan for escape for them. But Rahab doesn't stop just there. She knows that the destruction of her hometown is looming on the horizon, so she uses this as an opportunity to save her family. In verse 12, it says, "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." Rahab uses this opportunity to bring safety to her entire family, and the men accept her terms. They tell her that in order for them to know which house is hers, she would just need to tie a scarlet cord in the window so that they didn't attack her house when they showed up back to take the land. The men go down a rope outside her window in the wall of the city, and then they return to their people, the Israelites. And they tell Joshua everything that had happened to them, and they say, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." The stories goes on in the chapters ahead. Joshua and the Israelites tear down the walls of Jericho, but spare Rahab and her family in the process. And in Joshua chapter 6, it says that Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her because she hid the men that Joshua had set as spies to Jericho. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. Rahab's whole family was spared, and she then was invited in and lived among the people of Israel. She was an outsider from a different community who had faith and who was brought into the greater story that God was writing. Friend, this is an incredible picture of the kingdom of God. It's not an exclusive club that only few can get into if they're born into the right family. Everyone is welcome in the kingdom of God. And chances are you, like me, haven't had many opportunities like Rahab had in her life, to house spies and lie to kings and rebel against your community. But I do think you and I have something important to learn from Rahab. You see, Rahab wasn't the type of person who let her past define her. No matter your history or past or what you've done, there's a reality that you can live in from this story. Your past has no bearing on what you can do for God once you've surrendered to Him. And for some of you, that's the truth I think you need to hear today. That God deeply loves you and is for you and doesn't see your past as a barrier for what He can do with you. But I would imagine that there are many of you who can't really relate to this part of the story at all. You see, when I was in junior high and high school, I was a really good kid. I would hear messages like this and think in many ways that they didn't apply to me because I didn't have some really big thing that I had done in the past that I needed God to redeem me from. But what I learned over the years is that I needed and need the truth of this message just as much as someone whose mistakes can be seen on the outside by others. I mess up every day. I don't do the things that I know I should do. I don't treat people kindly at times. I'm prideful. I'm selfish. I struggle with making the right choices. Yet all of these things are things that God does not look at as something that counts us out. The picture that we get in the lineage of Jesus is that our pasts do not define us, and God can use us no matter how unusable we think we are. But the rubber meets the road when we have to surrender our plans and have faith in what we cannot see. Rahab had faith in God and in God's protection of His people. She had heard the stories about how He had protected His people, and Rahab had confidence and faith that she could maybe, just maybe, be included in that protection too. Because of her faith, her and her whole family was spared from the destruction that happened in Jericho, and she became an ancestor to Christ. The definition of faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. The Bible will go further and say that faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. That's in Hebrews chapter 11. And although Rahab had not seen the work that God had done, she had assurance in the things that she had hoped for. And her name was mentioned in what we call the Hall of Faith that we just read in the book of Hebrews. In our world today, it can be tempting for us to stray away from the messy parts of our own stories. We want to be sure that our Instagram feed has only the best photos and we share about the grades that we're proud of, or we hold on to the hope that every day when it's time to be real, we have something good to share. So it can feel surprising when we think about the reality that God chose to have imperfect people be the ones highlighted in the lineage of Jesus. But I love that God does that because it shows that God doesn't want to wipe out the uncomfortable parts of our story. He includes them so that we can be reminded that we have a place in his greater story. Because if you are anything like me, you are not perfect. And God doesn't need you to be perfect for you to be invited into his greater story. He's just asking you, like he asked Rahab, to have faith.